Hello, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be tuning in from in the world. Very happy to be here with you on day 2 of our Thrive Conference. I'm Nancye Blair Black. I'm with the Block Uncarved and also a doctoral student finishing up my degree at Teachers College, Columbia University. And some of the work that I'll be sharing with you today has come out of that research that I have done there, and I'm very excited to share that with you. I'm also a part of the Thrive Conference Committee and just so grateful that you all are taking this time, whether you are live with us. And if you are, please say hello in the chat. I would love to hear from you. Let me know where you're tuning in from. So if you are here, definitely say hi. And if you are watching the recording, hello. So happy you're part of this community. And be sure to continue to connect with us. You all can find me on LinkedIn if you'd like to stay in touch after the conference as well. As we jump right in, I'd like to share that when I started this work, there was already evidence in the research saying things like this. Over the last decade, many of the most established world democracies are showing signs of wear. Now, that might seem very obvious to many of us now, but this was surprising when I started reading things like this in 2008. Okay, this was actually startling to me. It wasn't something that was as obvious at that time. But as I dug into the research, I started to look at the roots of why that was happening and how we might address it. How do we seek over a long period of time to maintain these democracies? Can we turn this around? And what I saw as I started looking into this was, again, more signs, though still more tolerant. This is a quote, though still more tolerant than certain demographic groups than former generations, or towards certain demographic groups, young citizens, for example, in the US, were becoming less tolerant over time. So again, this has been happening progressively over the last 20 years. We're seeing this, and even over the last 30 years. However, what we also know from the research, and this has been shown across many different studies, is that if we want to have and perpetuate cooperation within a society, a majority of people must be what they call trusters. Okay. Unfortunately, levels of interpersonal trust have been decreasing in most of the world. We'll take a look in a moment. But over the last several decades, in most of the world, this interpersonal trust has been decreasing. Now, you might say, but I have so many people in my life that I do trust. And that is because there are multiple types of trust that show up in the research. So when we look, we see there's particularized trust. So that's the first one. Particularized trust refers to trust within a limited group of people. Okay, so that's trust that's within your group or within your network. It could be your family, it could be your friends, it could be your particular neighbors or those who are in other groups that you identify with. Unfortunately, what this can cause is and you might have seen this in the world, is an I trust us, but I don't trust them. Okay. So this particularized trust, you may feel like you have a community around you. You may even feel safe, but it's to the exclusion of other people groups. What we're looking for here when we want to perpetuate cooperation, or we want to have a democracy specifically that flourishes, is generalized trust. That's what's needed. Generalized trust refers to trust in people in general. Okay, so this includes strangers. This includes people who are outside of your family or outside of your immediate social circle or your friend groups. It reflects this broad idea that most people in society will behave in a fair, cooperative, a trustworthy way, right? So that I could trust a stranger. I can say hello and that's safe and that would be fine to do, right? I will tell you, I am a truster. Sometimes too trusting, but I am a truster. And because I'm from the South, I talk to strangers. I say hi. I say hello. I have been in elevators where that has become very awkward. So some of you are are a truster as well. You're not afraid to say good morning to a stranger or talk to someone in a coffee shop or, a restaurant, wherever you might go, in the grocery store. But for many in the world, that's more difficult. Okay. That interpersonal trust with strangers has at some point been broken or tarnished. And it's something that as a human race, we're struggling with. Now, mirroring this concept of trust is social capital. Okay. So these are those ties and connections that hold us together. And in Robert Putnam's research, he identified two types of social capital that end up having the same type of impact on democracy. Okay. So we have first bonding social capital. This is going to sound similar to that particularized trust. All right. Bonding social capital refers to strong ties among people who are similar and closely connected. Okay. So this is, I feel bonded. I feel like I have support. I have help. I have these strong ties, but it's just with people who are like me. So it can lead to exclusion of outsiders, to group polarization. Again, that us versus them mentality. Even though you may have group loyalty or group solidarity, you are creating that through that us versus them. All right. Whether that's you or others, right? This is something that's happening in our society. And I think most of us who have chosen to come to this conference have seen this or experienced it as part of why we're here together. Now, that's bonding social capital. The good news is there's another type, and it is called bridging social capital. So bridging social capital refers to the social networks and relationships that actually create ties and connections across different social groups. Okay. So I want you to think about this as this bonding social capital and this particularized trust is about looking inward. Okay. That's inward into the group. We trust, we have support, we have loyalty, but it's all within. When we're looking at this generalized trust and this bridging social capital, the things that are required, okay, that are required to maintain a democracy and to cultivate democratic dispositions, those are about looking outward, okay? Those are about trust and support and loyalty. That is to the bigger, broader picture, even to those who might be strangers or maybe in groups that are different than our own. All right. So this kind of gets us started in thinking about what is missing and sort of what is going wrong in terms of maintaining these democracies. Why are they in decline? But you might say, okay, well, that was when you started your research. So what do we see now? So I'm going to drop a link in the chat for you here. Oh. And I'm going to drop that in the chat for you. Here we go. And this is a link to this infographic. And if you click on the link, you'll be able to see it a lot bigger. But this is a recent study. So they did a survey around the world in many different countries trying to find out about trust. Now, this is a blend. When I looked at the types of questions, they are looking at two things. So it leans towards this generalized trust. It says, generally speaking, would you say that most people can be trusted? Or the alternative being that you need to be very careful in dealing with people. Okay. And people could respond as most people can be trusted. They could respond as they couldn't, they didn't know, or you need to be very careful. Okay. So when we look here at this data, and again, if you use that link, you can see it larger. We see this decline. In fact, since 1993, trust scores have fallen in 17 countries, including Canada down by 4 points, Japan down by 4 percentage points, the US down by 13 percentage points in that time. Okay. So this is something that is happening. It is a movement. There are areas that still do have high levels of trust, in particular in Scandinavia, and also in China. Okay. In those places, the majority of people are still trusters, which is very interesting. But when we look at other places in the world, we see that this is in decline. And there are actually some countries where this level of trust is under 10%. All right. So this is certainly something that right now, we're having to look at and examine. More recently, so if you are in the US, there was a study done. This was just published in 2025. So I will drop this Pew Research study in the chat as well for you. And when we look at this, they wanted to know, again, about Americans' trust in one another. This is actually such a fabulous data visualization. I encourage you to explore this and take a closer look at what's happening and what they're talking about in this article. But I want to show you a couple of things in it that are pertinent to our conversation. Okay, so first, they showed, here we go, the same sort of thing we were seeing in the other data. Americans trust each other less than they did a few decades ago. So here we see tracked from 1972 all the way to 2024. And we see that in that time, it's declined from nearly half being trusters to only 34%. And that was the rate in 2018. It's still, and let me see, did the links go in? I see a couple of you saying, where is the link? Let me make sure that it went through. Oh, I put it in the general one. Let me back up and give you both of these in the stage chat. Someone out there is having a great time looking at this data right now. Here we go. Let me get these both into the correct chat this time. I pasted it in the wrong place. There you go. Thanks, Marita, for letting me know. I appreciate that very much. And so we see that this is decreasing, although we have a little bit of maintenance between 2018 and 2024 in this survey. But one of the things that really is striking to me is what we're seeing by age. Okay. So in the past, we had sort of expected that younger people were more trusting, right? Younger people were more tolerant. That's not what we're seeing in this most recent data from 2023 to 2024. We're actually seeing that our oldest population as a group tends to be the most trusting, though still less than half. And our youngest, our 18 to 29-year-olds in the survey, only 26% were trusting, saying that the majority of people, could be trusted. Most people can be trusted. So this raises alarm bells for me, especially as an educator. I've been doing work. I've been in education since 2000, both as a classroom teacher, as a technology specialist, as a consultant, curriculum provider. I work in teacher education, and I still am a technology leader at Mi Escuela Montessori in Central Florida, where we provide free public Montessori to a very diverse student population. It is so hard for me to look at this data and to see what is happening, this trajectory that we're on, and then to think of this next generation. So that's as an educator. Okay, but also as a parent. So maybe you are in education. I know from some of the data I've seen, it looked like those who are attending live, nearly 50% at the conference, maybe are in education in some form. So if that's you, maybe you are concerned about students and our future. Maybe you're a parent like I am as well, and you are worried about this because of your own children and their future and what will happen to democracy there. Maybe you are a community leader or just a community member who cares, and you're worried about, what this means for your world. Okay. So, I think there's a lot going on here. It is less interesting to me, I will say, because I see in the chat, Dr. Reed mentioning about men trusting more than women. For me, this one was not surprising. Okay. I think that makes sense in gender, that women would be less trusting out in the world. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. But the age one has been surprising to me to watch over the last several years. So let's keep going. So the other thing is that even within countries and within states, and if you go into this data, you'll see some examples, but within countries, this can vary greatly. Within even states, it will vary greatly. And they have shown that even within the same city, the levels of trust can vary a lot from neighborhood to neighborhood. Okay. So that tells us a couple of things, because what we know then is that building trust is not just about what we're doing as a whole nation. It's not just like, oh, this is our national culture. There are things happening in these smaller microcosms that are leading to greater trust or not. Unfortunately, given that the majority of people must be trusters, this still presents a problem. Okay. There's a variety of reasons that this is happening and why it would happen in certain neighborhoods or certain states and not others. Some of them are historical. Okay. But some of the causes include things like the increasing polarization, fear mongering, scapegoating particular groups of people that causes fear of those who are other. And another one is, I do a lot of work with emerging technologies in education, and the way that algorithms are designed for profit over people in news and social media means that to keep people scrolling, to keep people watching, they must show them increasingly extreme or angering content. And that continues to divide us. All right, so we're a bit into this, and I know that what I've shared so far about the state of things is not very optimistic, right? You might be hearing that and thinking, well, this is the trajectory, this is the direction we're going on. And is there even anything we can do? Can we turn this around? And my answer is yes. My answer is that there is actually plenty in the research that shows that there are very clear conditions and experiences that can lead to increasing generalized trust and bridge social capital. Okay. Now, one piece of the research shows that there's a correlation between higher education. So again, providing a quality education to everyone, that equitable education is incredibly important, and it does lead to greater trust. Also, higher socioeconomic status. And if I had my way, I would fix that right now. That would be amazing to systemically and systematically address that for everyone. If we could solve those two problems today, we would have higher trust and we could potentially be in a different direction. Given that in my sphere of influence, I can't solve those two problems by myself, I look to see what else is in the research about what we can do. What can we do within our families? What can we do within our classrooms? What can we do within our organizations to actually cultivate these dispositions that are essential for democracy? And there are things that we can do as educators and parents and community leaders to do that. I'm going to start with talking about some of the things around our students, and I'm going to use examples from how we've been implementing these in classrooms. But I'd love for you, if you're in a different environment, maybe you work with teachers, maybe you work with other leaders, maybe you work with members of your organization, maybe you're in business or corporation. Think about, as I share each of these, how they transfer and translate into those settings for you, because each of them applies not just to children, but across the board. But there are some special things about what can happen if we start with children. Here's why. Okay. What we have seen in psychology, in child development, and in even historical educational experts like John Dewey, what we see is this plasticity that happens in young people. Okay, they say young people, Dewey said, young people are plastic, having an ability to explore and deliberate upon diverse perspectives, flexible to the influence of new sculpting influences. Okay, so young people, we have a greater chance. Once someone is more set in their ways, things have to be more intense or more substantially different for them to realize and take on a new belief. But if we are able to cultivate this in young people, we can make significant progress for an entire generation. And part of the reason for that is that there are what we call sensitive periods. I mentioned working in the Montessori. We talk about these sensitive periods, these developmental stages that take place. And in particular, we see from the research, okay, so Uslander, who was a leading researcher around generalized trust, specifically saw that high school students who had a friend of a different race were more likely to become trusting adults. Okay, so these experiences that people are having when they're younger are incredibly important to how they turn out to be as adults and whether they have cultivated these democratic dispositions or not. And what we see here is that during this time, The research supports very specific instructional practices, okay? They're specific and intentional, and when used together, they actually can make quite a big difference. They will need to be used on a regular basis to cultivate these peacemaking and democratic dispositions and skills. But the nice thing is that because of that, whereas schools can't solve every problem in the world, this kind of makes schools and classrooms an ideal place for facilitating these types of activities and this type of learning and cultivation. And so we're going to look at 4 important strategies or elements for cultivating generalized trust and bridge social capital. And these are a synthesis from research in sociology, anthropology, education, and political sciences. So this is where we get practical, okay? We've talked about the state of things. We know why this is important. What are we going to do about it? So 4 characteristics of cooperative learning tasks. So this is the first thing we're going to discuss, cooperative learning. Now, we've already seen in research that cooperative learning, not competitive, not collaborative, okay, specifically cooperative learning tasks have been shown to increase student achievement, race relations, the acceptance of special needs students, and self-esteem. Okay, so if we know that doing cooperative learning can lead to that, already in the research, we know this is the case, then this is something we need to really consider how we're bringing into our classrooms. When we talk about this, Maria Montessori discussed this, and she specifically said to prepare, she talks about the prepared environment, how intentionally we design our learning environments. She said to prepare and arrange a series of motives for cultural activity in a special environment made for the child. So when we're preparing this environment for the child to cultivate these things, in this case, when we're talking about cooperative learning, we're talking about that it's pervasive, that it is precise, and that it is intense. We want them to actually have some intense emotional experiences, not just a 5-minute icebreaker here and there. That is not actually going to bring people together. Okay. We need to get to this bigger picture. So when we talk about the characteristics specifically that we must have, the first one is that they must be solving a problem. Okay. So if we want to cultivate peacemaking dispositions, democratic dispositions, the first thing is in their cooperative learning tasks, they should be solving a problem. It should be a meaningful problem. This is meaningful work. When students do meaningful work, they have more motivation. They believe the work is valuable to do. So this could be inquiry-based. It can be an authentic problem or a hypothetical problem. It's more powerful if it's a real problem or if they have a real audience that they're trying to help. But the task should have clear directions with open solutions. Okay, so these are open-ended tasks where they are actually having to solve this problem themselves, and there's not only one correct answer. An example of this, for 10 years, I was on the school board with Lakeland Montessori School. So some of the examples I'm going to share are from there as well, especially with our middle schoolers. On my front slide, I had mentioned that some of the work in this presentation was developed in partnership with one of the most amazing educators I've ever known, Anna Clark. And she was certainly a partner in implementing some of these and testing these in educational environments. So this is one example where the students would go camping each year and they would do a practice run ahead of time. Okay. And it's simple, but it's a real world problem. They needed to work together with their group to put up their tent and then get the tent back into the bag where it is supposed to fit. Some of you have probably tried that in your real lives. It's not as easy as it sounds. But this is a real world problem where students had to come together to do that. So this first element of solving a real problem is important. But this second one shows up all over the research. Okay, so sometimes we think that the best thing to do is to bring two people who are different together and have them talk about their differences. Okay. And if they get to know that person and their differences, they will appreciate them more or trust them more. That's actually not what we're seeing in the research. Okay. What we do see, and this comes out of a very strange original experiment that, if you are in research, it predates the review board, the IRB, that considers the effects on people. So I'm not sure whether this sort of research could be done now, but in 1961, when this started, they Muzaffar Sharif did a project where he took two groups of very contentious, very opposite high schoolers, okay, who were at summer camp. They did not get along. They were very different. There was a lot of contention, and faked a bus breakdown so that the students had to work together to push the bus and solve this problem. And they saw that this brought them together and increased the generalized trust. Okay. What was happening there? What was happening is that they had what's called a superordinate goal. This is so important. And this is something we miss a lot in education. Okay. Cooperative learning, common. Doing it with these characteristics, less common. So superordinate task is when you have to overcome an umbrella obstacle. Okay. Umbrella meaning bigger, over us. An obstacle or a problem that supersedes the conflict between the groups. So this is not conflict resolution. This is not let's appreciate our differences. It's actually, can we work together on something that is bigger than our differences, such that we forget that they're there and we learn to trust them. And then we realize, wait, we are different, but we trust each other. We're friends now. We worked together on this. We solved this problem together. So these problems and these tasks don't actually have to be even, considered civic or political or activist in nature, but it's just that it's bigger than the differences themselves. Okay. We want to move away from us versus them thinking, us versus them mentalities. We want to see, how do we bring people together towards these larger goals? Okay. So that's what we're trying to accomplish here. The third piece is something called positive interdependence. Positive interdependence. Now, what this is that they must have tasks that are interdependent, meaning that it takes more than one person to complete. Okay. It cannot be achieved on your own. You can't break up the group and each person could do it by themselves. And on top of that, so it's interdependent, but the positive interdependence is a condition where each of the individuals, their perception is that they can only achieve their own goal only if the others in the group also achieve theirs. Okay. So this is really important. And this can show up in different ways. Here you see, this is like a ropes course activity where they have these tubes and the marble rolls down. It requires every single person to work in sync for the marble to make it down the chute. If anyone is higher than the person before them, if they don't have this just right, if they're not working together, it doesn't work. The success of the individual is tied to the success of the group. So when we think about roles, when we think about delegating, right, this all comes into play because are we actually tied to each other's success? Can we, as we heard yesterday in Dr. Nancye Blackwood's keynote, can we see those points of human connectedness? Can we see how I am because we are, as she said? So this is helping us to see that, and that we are interdependent on one another. An example of this, our students would put on a play every year, and it was dinner theater. So here you see three boys who are out. Each of these boys are in charge of a team. One is dessert, one is salad, and one is main course. They each had a committee, but they have a shared budget that they must all come under, and they have a shared preparation. So they had to work together, not just within their own committees, but come together across. The success of the whole group depended on every person doing their part and their ability to work together. The final characteristic of the cooperative learning tasks is it must be an ongoing aspect of the learning experience. So again, this can't just be a 5-minute icebreaker, or this can't be something that you do the day before the break for fun or something, right? This needs to be an ongoing aspect of the instructional design in our classrooms, an ongoing experience that we provide to our children if we're parents, or in our organizations. If you want to have true trust and team building happening, doing these things, even in your organization or your company in an ongoing way, is going to foster this. It can't just be a one and done. So these are the characteristics of the cooperative tasks. And the thing we want to have along with this, okay, if everyone in the group, if everyone in the cooperative task is exactly the same, they are just learning to continue trusting the people who are like them. Okay. So what we want is to have heterogeneous groupings of people who are different. Now, here are a couple of ways that can be done. One is perceived differences. Okay. So the reason this says perceived differences is if everyone in the group sees themselves as the same, it doesn't do it. All right. They need to actually know without you making it the point of the activity, but they know that they're different in some ways. Okay. But the other reason I say perceived differences is what I've noticed in practice, and other people who are doing this work have noticed, is that those who perceive themselves as different are not always who we think. So in this photo, this was a group of boys who are working together on a project. And you might look at this group of people and think, who in that classroom might think they're different and who might see themselves as the same? And the interesting answer was, it was this one because of the bow tie. I'm different. Perceived himself as different from the group in some substantial ways. So we have to make sure that when we're doing this, we're including everyone. We are thinking about actually everyone in our communities and the different ways that they are different, but also how they're perceiving those differences, and not just assume that everyone who looks a certain way or is of a certain gender, is of a certain race or ethnicity, is of a certain sexual orientation, oh, well, they would obviously feel belonging already. We only need to worry about the others. We actually want to take care of everyone. Okay. We want every individual to feel belonging and to recognize those ways that every person that we encounter feel unique and feel different. Right. And to honor that. So it could be those perceived differences. The other characteristic we need here is, though people in the group are different, they should all have equal status. So you don't want to have, captain, leader, something like this that can override the team. They must have equal status. We've even done activities where middle school students have worked with college students, but it wasn't the college students teaching the middle schoolers. They were all given a problem. In this case, it had to do with science, and it was how much salt would it take to make a boiled egg neutrally buoyant. Okay, so adding salt to the water, and then they had to figure this out together, but none of them knew the answer going into it. So they were on equal status in their groups trying to solve this problem, and a middle schooler was just as likely to have an aha moment for the team as the other. So again, they were different. In this case, the difference was in age and education level, but they were able to work as equals. It's very powerful. And then I'm going to keep saying it, which is, we want these interactions to be one of two things. It either needs to be an intense interaction. When you experience something and you have big feelings, right? It's a big emotion. You remember that more, whether it's positive or negative, right? So if it's an intense interaction of some kind, it's why here in the US, many students do ropes courses like you see here, and it challenges them. There are moments where they're having to do intense things as a group, or they're conquering fears. And so that sticks with them. But also we want to have sustained interaction. Okay. So it could be either one, very intense, or it could be consistent over time. And either of those is going to work well, but we want them to be working with people who are different from them in these kinds of environments. This can also be real or simulated. So maybe you don't have a lot of diversity in your neighborhood with your children, or in your classroom, or in your one school. So you can look at this in other ways. It could be real, but it could be simulated. They could do role playing of historical figures, or play different people. In this bottom one, They're solving an engineering problem, but you can see it takes every single student in their role to complete the problem, but they all are representing a different part of that engineering process. So that can be it. You can also look outside your classroom, outside of your family, outside of your neighborhood. Look for opportunities to connect with those who are different. So we have our students work with senior citizens. Sometimes they go in, they interview, they ask stories. So they're doing projects that allow them to have these cooperative interactions with those who are different. It doesn't have to take place in the classroom itself. The other way you can do this is using technology. Okay. So you can use technology and engage in projects that already exist or connect with other classrooms. This can be very effective. And if you've not been to the GLOW conference, formerly the Global Education Conference, that would be a great place to find out about what's happening. But when you're vetting those projects, you want to look for these characteristics that I've shared. Okay, so here are some ways very quickly that you can make this happen. So you're thinking, okay, I have these characteristics. Where can this show up in my company, in my organization, in my classroom, or in my home? One is just in games and sports. Okay, so this is the first one, games and sports. It could be ropes course, but again, you have to think about whether you can change that game or sport so that it's not competitive. Okay, competitive does not get us here. What you're looking for is cooperative. So, for example, here, one of the things is something called Jacob's Ladder on a ropes course, and it's designed so it cannot be completed without a partner. Okay, they have to work together to be successful. You can also adjust games and sports. Ultimate frisbee can be changed. You can have students self-referee, calling their own fouls, admitting fault. Getting into what it means to have the spirit of the game or sportsmanship. So really thinking about how we do that, but it's the cooperativeness and not the competition that gets us there. The second thing is thinking about how you do deal with conflict resolution and how that could be a problem to be solved where everyone has equal status and they have to come to agreements together. Again, these should not be based on their differences, but something that they're working towards. So it could be, for example, here, a Bill of Rights of friendship, or for working groups in class, or please just stop deleting my work in my Google Doc, right? But figuring these things out and negotiating them together and learning to have that respect and trust for one another. It could be in academic tasks, okay? So this, we think about group work, we think about cooperative learning. So it could be in these academic tasks. This is one where called the carbon cycling game. And each student has a role. So one is a mitochondria, one is a chloroplast, one is atmosphere, one's cloud, one is ATP, one is sunlight. They're all each acting as an element in this environment. And they actually have to work to build and respiring glucose molecules. Okay, but they all have their own role. It takes every person fulfilling that role to complete this game. All right, so that's an academic task. They're actually tackling real academic standards, in this case, science, but they're using those principles to accomplish it. And then finally, large scale. I mean, this is one of the easiest, is like a large scale project, right? Where they take on a big problem of some kind. It still could be a classroom project. So it could be something like planting a biosphere, where a goldfish, a snail, and 3 plants must all stay alive once it's sealed. And each student in the group is responsible for monitoring the well-being of a particular living thing, monitoring carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, the water, the energy flow. Okay, so they each have a part in keeping that alive. Anna Clark and I launched with funding from the American Montessori Society. We received a Peace Seed grant that funded the development and implementation of a project that involved our students. But what we chose to do was to create a one-time global program that integrated all of these principles into a sustained and timely real-world advocacy project. And it was called the Alpaca Box Challenge. This is Anna. Could not have done this without her. It was an incredible project. And when we were starting this work, it was sort of at the peak of the Syrian refugee crisis. And so this crisis began in 2011, but by 2017 and 2018, there were over 5 million displaced people, okay? And what we knew was that refugee children needed basic necessities and comforts. And how do we come up with this title? So if kids need help in the form of supplies and encouragement, I'll pack a box. It's a pun. I'll pack a box. I'll pack a box. And so here, the students were solving a real world problem of collecting these supplies. They had a superordinate goal. So even though they were working with people who were different from them, the focus was on helping this third party that they all shared and care about. There was positive interdependence in how this was set up. We partnered with an organization at that time, it no longer exists, called Operation Refugee Child, who made sure the boxes got where they needed to go. But we had over 500 students in heterogeneous groups. So they were partnered with classrooms where students were significantly different from them. And they worked with that partner classroom to share ideas, to brainstorm, to vet each other's plans. And so they were dependent on each other. They did work together. They had equal status. And this went urban, suburban, rural, public, private, charter across 4 time zones and 2 continents. In fact, one of the speakers at this conference, Nadim, from the school in Pakistan, was part of this project with us a few years ago. So it's pretty exciting. This had a huge impact, okay, on these students in these schools as they pulled together these hope boxes. They decided what to go in them. And they thought not just about the physical human needs, but also about the social and emotional needs of children. And we saw firsthand how this changed the students' thinking and thoughts about caring about others, about wanting to help people who were strangers to survive, develop more empathy, more trust, not just to these strangers that they were serving, right? Not just this sort of savior complex, but they were inherently working with students who were different than them to do this project across these classrooms. And that made a big difference in their trust and their openness to work with others to solve problems. In fact, this school here in Florida was all migrant, almost entirely migrant students who were working, and they put together a bake sale to raise funds to get the items that were needed for these children. So it was just really incredible what these students did, how they felt more empowered, they felt more helpful, they felt, you can see here, more happy. They were proud to do something that mattered and to work with others to accomplish this. This is that school in Pakistan. As part of their activities, they did a celebration on International Peace Day. And we can see all these different students, the items they chose, the personal notes and artwork and cards that they created. And in the end, to have this identity, I am a collaborating, box packing, human need meeting peacemaker. So that's what they got when they finished that project. All right. So these are some of the things that really can make this difference. And when we bring these characteristics together, it truly can make a difference in the lives of our students. If we do this in an ongoing way, if we do this with an entire generation of children and teenagers and young people, an entire generation of workers in our company, an entire generation of volunteers in our organization, think about the impact that we could make on sustaining democracy over time. So here are the characteristics again. They must solve a problem, have a superordinate goal, require positive interdependence, be an ongoing aspect of the learning experience, and have heterogeneous groups. And I would love for you all, as I close, to say hello to each other in the chat and share one assignment, activity, routine that you might do with your students or your children or in your organization or company that would cultivate peacemakers. I'll stick around for a couple minutes to see these in the chat and communicate with you all as well. Thank you all so much for being here. If you have questions, if you'd like to connect with me, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I would love to stay connected with all of you after this conference. I don't want this work to end. We want this to be the beginning of an ongoing community and movement. And we're so thrilled that each of you all are on the ground floor with us building this together. So thank you all so much for being here. I look forward to seeing your responses in the chat of some ideas that you might do or use in your own environments with your own children or students or families or organizations. I look forward to seeing that. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your conference. Thank you so much. Great. And I'm still live, so I'm going to comment on a couple things as they come in. We have a comment here. This is a fabulous one. I'm familiar with this. Dr. Reed is mentioning Dr. Jane Goodall's Roots and Shoots organization for youth and these types of strategies. Yes, they have resources and projects that you can complete that certainly align with many of these principles. And if they don't, if you find a resource and it's not perfect, you can adapt it. Okay. Think about how you might adapt it to give it. Maybe it doesn't have heterogeneous groups built in, add that in. Or maybe it says, assign a leader of the group. Can you change that and still accomplish that task, right? So you all can adapt those resources you find out in the world. Thank you for sharing that resource in the chat as well. Fabulous. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a great rest of your conference, and I look forward to connecting with you all in LinkedIn and hopefully someday in the real world as well. Thank you so much.